Hi there, and welcome to Laser Classrooms, Bringing STEM to Light. This is Module 4, presentation number 1. And in this presentation, we're going to take a look at how light interacts with materials. Now, we've already started this by learning about how light comes from a source and then it is either absorbed or reflected by the objects that it hits, right? So we see the wavelengths that are reflected back to our eyes, and we don't see the wavelengths that are absorbed by the material. And different materials absorb different visible wavelengths of light and reflect other wavelengths of light. And that's why some objects are green, other ones are blue. Basically, that absorption and reflection process is what gives us all the colors around us. We're going to go a little bit deeper into the nature of light and the way that light interacts with materials in this section. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is that light travels, and it travels in a specific way. It travels in a straight line. And this is going to set us up for examining reflection a little bit more deeply as we go on. So light travels, it travels in a straight line until it hits something, and we already have looked at how it can either be absorbed or reflected, but it also can be transmitted. So in just a few moments, I'm going to introduce a couple of activities that will demonstrate that light travels. It travels in a straight line. It spreads out as it travels, and it can interact with different materials in different ways. So this is going to introduce a bunch of vocabulary. We're going to introduce terms like opaque, the fact that light is transmitted or transmission. We'll actually put a name to this phenomenon that we were looking at with the color absorption. We'll take a closer look at what that term means. And another way that you can talk about absorption is blocking. That'll set us up to be able to talk about shadows. And also reflection. We've touched a little bit on that. We're going to go just a little bit deeper into reflect in the setup for the full activity about reflection. We can talk about the word shiny, shadow. There's going to be a bunch of vocabulary here. And so we'll, after we look at the activities, we'll take a look at a tool called a graphic organizer that is a good way for introducing, elaborating on, and kind of reinforcing that new vocabulary that we're going to introduce. So right here, we will go directly into a quick demonstration by me of a couple of activities that you can do to introduce these concepts.
We're also going to introduce the concept that light is something that travels. Mostly kids experience light as something that's either there or not there, and these two activities are going to give kids a feel for the fact that light travels. So the next activity is called Follow the Beam, and it's going to introduce how the lights work, and it's also going to introduce students to the idea that light travels, and it travels in a specific way. It travels in straight lines. So the way we're going to do that, and this is all on your activity sheet in your book, is we're going to start with a couple of either pieces of paper. I've used pieces of paper here, but you can also use index cards. And you're going to poke holes in those index cards or that piece of paper so that they're all lined up, right in the same place. And then you're going to stand them up, and then you're going to line up your two pieces of paper with the holes aligned. And you're going to take the slit cap off of one light box and hold the light box up against the first piece of paper so that it shines through the first hole, through the second hole, and lands on a solid piece of paper behind it. And what you can see here is that the light has actually traveled from the light source through the holes to the piece of paper. And what this is intended to demonstrate is that light travels in a straight line. And that's going to set us up for some of the lessons that we're going to do after this. You can also introduce the fact that light travels until it hits something else by inserting a solid piece of paper in between, and then you can see that the light does not travel through that solid piece of paper to the other paper on the back. So that's our introduction to how light travels. So now that we've seen that light travels in a straight line, we're going to use the light blocks to see one more property of how light travels, and that is that it spreads out when it gets further away from a surface, and it condenses and intensifies as it gets closer to a surface. So let's see what that means visually. So you're going to turn on your light blocks, and hold it very close to either the table or a wall, and you'll see that the light becomes smaller and also brighter as it gets closer to the surface. And as you lift the light blocks either up or away from your wall, you can see that that patch of light gets bigger and it also gets dimmer. What's happening is as the light has to travel further, it is spreading out, and as it has to, the same amount of light has to cover a larger and larger area, it's getting dimmer and dimmer. And then you come closer again, and that's just to get a feel for the fact that light travels, and that as it travels, it generally tends to spread out. So the next lesson we're going to talk about is called Let the Light Shine, and here we're going to introduce what happens when light meets different materials. For this lesson, you're going to want to have one of your light blocks. I am going to use the red one. I'm going to use the red one. And then a couple of other things that you have both in your kit, and you can also introduce a couple of things that you have around the house. I'm just going to use things that I took out of the kit. I'm going to use the mirror, a piece of white paper, one of the plastic baggies that held some of the elements of the kit, and a piece of the tissue paper that one of your lenses was wrapped in. Let's take a look and see what happens when the light hits each of these objects. And what we're looking to do here is introduce a couple of terms. One of them is what happens when you use the baggie and you hold the light close up to the baggie and look behind it. The light is transmitted, and it's transmitted because that material is transparent. And if you pull the light back, you might see that some of that light is reflected off of that baggie as well. So you've got a couple things going on there with the baggie. Or you can also use a piece of transparency paper. Now let's go to the piece of tissue paper. And if you hold your light up to the tissue paper and look behind it, you can see that some of the light passes through, but not all of it. And that would be a material that we would call translucent. And so it is partially transmitting, and even though it's not shiny, because you can see the red on the piece of the paper that is facing you, that's actually light that's being reflected back. And we'll do more with that later, but you can see both reflection and transmission here. And that's a translucent piece of tissue paper. Now I'm going to introduce the piece of white paper and hold my light up to it and look behind it, and I can see that it is actually blocking the light. I can't see any light going through that paper, and I can see all of it bouncing off the paper and reflecting back into my eye. So again, it's not shiny, but it's reflecting. And those terms you can introduce the term absorption or blocking the light here. Then I'm going to take a look at my mirror. And now so much light is being reflected off the mirror that it's bouncing back not only to my eye, but I can see it on the table. And I can see that if I twist the mirror, the light actually moves as I move the mirror. And we'll do more with that later, but for now just observe that it's reflecting. And none of the light is passing through. So we have reflection and blocking or absorption.
So there's a couple of activities that you can do to introduce light and materials, and go a little bit deeper into how light interacts with different things and how it travels. And as promised, out of that comes a bunch of vocabulary. And actually, we've been accumulating vocabulary throughout, and in the next couple of sections, we will encounter even more vocabulary, but this is the one that has the most. So I thought this was a good time to kind of take a lesson that could be on the level of engage, really just kind of giving them a bunch of materials and letting them kind of play with them and see what they do, to taking it up a little bit, taking it up a notch to exploring and explaining by having an interactive method of engaging kids in vocabulary. And there are almost endless different ways to use a graphic organizer for vocabulary. There are many different models out there. I have a couple of favorites that I'll share with you, but basically the point of having a graphic organizer is to give kids a chance to really integrate and contextualize and reinforce those vocabulary terms and new words in a way that's a little bit more engaging than just studying for a quiz. So here's the very, very bare bones outline of what a graphic organizer should contain kind of at the minimum. You can see you have the words that you want to define or become familiar with and be able to use in the center. And then what you want to do is kind of circle that word with a number of different reinforcing tools. So using the word in a sentence is pretty common to everybody. Drawing a picture for your visual learners, that's going to be really powerful. It's also going to really help with recall. Of course, writing a definition in their own words after you have had time to present it, after they've had time, in this case, ideally, to actually experience the phenomenon, see what kinds of words they come up with to define it on their own. And then often synonyms and or antonyms are a good way to have some reinforcement and to demonstrate understanding. So you really could go all the way to elaborate with an activity like this, or evaluate. You could really kind of check in and see how they're doing. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this tool. At the end of this module, after we go through shadows, I will introduce the Marzano steps. Those are 6 steps for really using some tools for integrating vocabulary into the lesson and making the most of the vocabulary. And here you can see the 6 steps outlined. We're not going to go deeply into this at this moment. I've provided both a slideshow and also some in-depth reading for you to complete before I ask you to actually apply Marzano's 6 steps to all the terminology and all the vocabulary that we have completed up to this point in modules 1 through 4. So just the broad overview, Marzano's steps include providing a description, an example. That would be what you would do. It might be providing an opportunity for them to actually have the experience of these terms, like they get to see what opaque is and see what reflection is. And then we're going to ask the students to restate, or state or restate in their own words, what did they see? What's the definition of that word? What do they think that word means? Ask them to either draw a picture of it, or maybe they're going to draw a symbol or a graphic, or maybe they're going to do a search on the internet for something that represents that term or that word for them. And then the rest of the steps move into the future, and they really have to do with reinforcing and contextualizing and using those terminology so it doesn't just get put into a drawer and never used again. The more times you bring it up, the more ways that you reinforce it, the easier it's going to be for kids to understand and to recall. So we have some periodic activities that you can do to engage the word. You can ask students to discuss the terms with one another or use them in another assignment. And then, of course, my favorite, you can play games that use the terms. And the reading in the slideshow will go into more depth with that and put some meat on those bones. But for right now, we're going to conclude this presentation, and I'll see you next as we look at the fun of shadows.